Hi, everyone. I can see that people are slowly joining into the webinar right now. We're just going to give everyone a minute or two to join in, and then we'll get started. Okay, it's just been about a minute or so. I can see quite a few people have joined in and some still more trickling in. So we'll get started. So hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a virtual event celebrating the publication of Beyond 123. I am excited to be here with you all, and in just a few moments, we're going to be hearing from the editors of this book, Sandy Youmans and Lynda Colgan, joined by panelists Heather Douglas, Hannah Wickstrom, and Sherry Lynn Sporchuk, who we are so grateful to have with us here today. Just before I turn things over to Sandy and Lynda, I want to mention that we have a discount code available, as you can see here on the left side of your screen. It is Beyond 123 Launch, and this will give you 20% off any purchase made on the Canadian Scholars website, and you're able to use that discount code up until May 31st, 2024. So we do encourage you to take advantage of this great discount available. We will also be taking any questions from the audience for the editors and panelists at the end of this presentation, so please feel free to use the question and answer function through Zoom. There should be a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you may submit your questions anytime during the presentation. Let's begin. Please welcome Sandy and Lynda.
Sandy, are you going to say a few words, or do you want me to go directly into my slides?
I think you're going to start, but Lynda and I are thrilled to be here and are so grateful for your attendance and also for the support of our amazing colleagues who contributed to this book.
Thank you, Sandy. Okay, I'm assuming that everyone can see my slides. So again, I would like to welcome you to the official launch of Beyond 123, Strengthening Early Mathematics Education. And Sandy and I had the distinct pleasure of being the co-editors of this publication, and we're delighted to be here today. In terms of acknowledgements, it's important for us to recognize that we had the support of the Math Knowledge Network that was funded through the Ontario Ministry of Education, the Association of Early Childhood Educators, the SSHRC, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and also the MSTE Group and the Queen's Faculty of Education. I would also like to acknowledge the fact that this book was the product of many, many conversations with dedicated teachers who attended conferences with us and contributed to surveys and to the knowledge that was required to put such a book together. I'd also like to thank the teacher candidates who were involved in this. Not only experienced educators, but novice educators had a voice in describing to us what they needed to know and what was going to be important for them to begin their professional roles as early mathematics teachers. I would be remiss if I didn't thank Caitlin Winter and Leanna Ramos from the Canadian Scholars Women's Press Organization. I would also like to thank the 70 or more Pan-Canadian authors and contributors who made this book possible, as well as our editor. And I hope my colleagues will forgive me for a moment if I get personal here. I would also like to shout out to a member of the audience today, Ron Benson, a colleague of mine from the former Scarborough Board of Education. As I began my career in Scarborough as a coordinator with mathematics, Ron was the one who showed me, mentored me, and helped me to understand that teaching elementary is anything but elementary. My respect for him is enormous, and I thank him for the contributions that he has made to my career over time. Now to our timeline. Here we go. Back in 2017, Sandy initiated a survey of elementary educators in Ontario. You'll see the breakdown in this graph. You'll see that there are full day grade 1 teachers, there are registered early childhood educators, and there are kindergarten teachers. And basically what this survey asked them to do was identify their early math education training, describe the areas of early math that they were most comfortable and least comfortable teaching, and to tell us about their early math education professional development needs. This graph tells a huge story. What we found was that over 70% of our teachers, our ECEs, did not receive any early math development or education in their training to become educators in the classroom. More than 90% of our respondents told us that they did not have any specific math-related qualifications, either AQ courses or, for example, an undergraduate degree in math. What did they tell us? They told us that they were quite happy to teach math, numbers. They were quite happy to teach patterning, and they loved teaching geometry. When we asked them why, they said, well, these were areas of their own personal strength. These were areas that were fun and engaging, and these were areas that could be taught through the use of manipulatives and concrete connections. That survey began a process in which we started to have annual conferences, inviting teachers, representatives from the ministry, early childhood educators, teacher educators from across the province. That continued, and those conferences continued successfully. And then in 2021, there were some changes to the curriculum. And specifically what happened was that there was the addition of the socio-emotional side of learning and coding. And in order to show that we as a group, the critical transitions in early mathematics, were nimble, we began a process of responsiveness. And that responsiveness led to the development of this website called Early Math in Canada. And you will see that it has all of the kinds of resources that folks told us they needed. They needed resources for the family, resources for teachers, and they need resources to enhance their own professional learning. That led to, again, more conferences, more surveys, more information, and here we are now in 2023, or 2024 rather, able to celebrate the publication of Beyond 123. Beyond 123 came about because, as we learned, along with those that attended our conferences, early math is a key predictor of student academic success, not just in math, but also across all disciplines. We learned also that the cognitive research about how children learn math has not migrated to or influenced the practice of early math instruction in classrooms. We learned that high quality and challenging and accessible mathematics education for grades 3 to 6 children is a vital foundation for future math learning. And we learned that in every childhood setting, children should experience effective research-based curriculum and teaching materials. High quality classroom practice requires policies, organizational supports, resources that enable teachers to do this challenging and very important work. Beyond 123 embraces these 4 pillars in terms of bringing what is known at this time to those teachers who are most intimately involved with the classroom. And how do we do that? We talked to teachers. We wanted to make the job easier for them. Teachers are overwhelmed. We wanted to enhance the learning of children. We wanted to support families because parents are their children's first and most important teachers and members of the teaching team. And lastly, we wanted to communicate the fact that this book is about children, it's about children's mathematical thinking, and it's about mathematics. Beyond 123 is unique. It's the first of its kind in Canada, and we hope that it makes an impact in all of these areas. And now I'll turn things over to Sandy, and Sandy's going to tell you about what's inside and why it's organized that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynda. That was wonderful. And it has been just a privilege to work with Lynda Colgan. She is an amazing mentor, has so much expertise, and I just appreciate how she's such a wonderful collaborator. I've learned so much from her, and we were so excited to work on this project together. And I'm just going to share a little bit about, I guess, the real impetus for this book and a little bit about what's inside. So in terms of, the thing that really motivated us to work on this book was we did the Canadian Early Mathematics Education Conference. And so the first ever, and that was 2021. And when we did that, it was completely online and we had over 1,200 people registered. And so we knew that there was a definite need and a definite interest in this area. We had representation from across all provinces. And through this, by pulling this conference together, we had developed a national network of experts in the field of mathematics. And so we really came to recognize a need for a high quality and practical professional development resource. And oftentimes when you are the one who sort of recognizes a gap or a problem, oftentimes you are the one who is, kind of called to step in and fill that gap. And so I'm really grateful to have been able to do that with Lynda. And in terms of the book format, so the book really focuses on the why as well as the how, because, the research, our understanding about how things come to be and their importance is important for motivating change. For many of us, we're not going to make the change unless we realize how important it is. And so the why, and this, comes from a lot of Simon Sinek's work, is really important. And in addition to knowing the why, also the how. So how can that change look like, and what does it look like practically in a classroom? And so we've really tried to combine these both to help educators get a really good sense of, the practices that should be happening in early learning classrooms. In terms of the organization of the book, when we reached out to our experts in the field, we found out that we had expertise in these 4 main areas, and so we thought it would be important to include them. So section 1 looks at math learning in early years classrooms and, the importance of explicit instruction and focusing on making it also engaging is super important. And that kind of leads into the second part. So learning through play, that's a really important aspect of early years learning. And so that's section 2. And in section 3, we focused on technology and coding. And of course, that's important because, when we teach children, we're not only teaching them for the present, we're preparing them for the future. And so that's also an important aspect. And as Lynda mentioned earlier, families and communities are a huge part of children's learning. And if we want to strengthen early mathematics education, they need to be involved and equipped to help early learning in terms of math education. So special features of the book, we have a mix of theory and practice. And again, that's super important for motivating change and also equipping change. Each chapter has a set of learning objectives. We have key terms covered. Recommended resources. I think this is a really important part of the book because as educators, we really want high quality resources to be able to pull from, and free is also really good. So we have recommended resources, a number of really high quality free resources that have classroom ready activities that you can use in your classroom. We also have discussion questions. That's important for, helping, if this is used in a course, helping get to the deeper learning and apply the learning. There's a test bank, again, if you're using this as a part of a course, and there's PowerPoint slides for each chapter highlighting the main ideas. So that basically covers a little synopsis of the book. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to act as the moderator for our virtual book talk, and we have 4 people who are going to be speaking from each of the 4 sections. So we're going to start off with Heather Douglas talking about children's early numeracy skills. And so representing section 1, which is about learning in early learning classrooms, learning about math. So thank you, Heather, for giving us this presentation about early numeracy skills.
Thanks, Sandy. I'm just going to share my screen here, which is kind of hard to get to here. So let me just get in here. Bear with me here. There we go. Oh, and I'm just going to go back there. So there we go. I just want to say before I start that we at Carleton are on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. We acknowledge that settler relationships to both the land and the peoples of this land have been broken and misused. And as we discuss ways to educate our children and build our own understanding of how children learn, we recognize that harm has been done to our Indigenous peoples through colonialization, the residential school system, and the education system more broadly. So moving forward, I'd like us to acknowledge our own internal biases and examine how, as researchers and educators, we can build trust and reconciliation through thoughtful education and through prioritizing equity through inclusion, informed teaching, strong leadership, and universal access to resources and opportunities. So, good afternoon. My name is Heather Douglas, and I am one of the authors of Chapter 2. My co-authors are Karen Coleman.
Heather, can
Yes.
I interrupt for a second?
Yes, please.
Heather, we're not seeing your slides. We're seeing the presenter view.
Oh, okay. Sorry, let me just stop sharing there. That is okay. Let's see. My sincere apologies there. And let me just try this again.
You spent a lot of time on your slides, and we want to have people see them.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just play them without my there we go. My apologies here. This is one thing we probably should have done before is try this screen sharing. So here we go. Okay, so actually I'm just going to go back one slide. Okay, so my co-authors in this chapter are Karen Coleman, a retired elementary school teacher who has spent her career teaching young children, and she's actually spent the last part of her career teaching kindergarten. And my other co-author is Joanne Lefebvre, who is a cognitive scientist from Carleton University, who has spent her career examining how young children and adults learn and process numbers. So between the 3 of us, what we really tried to do is build a bridge between that education knowledge and that knowledge, research and practice. And so moving ahead, the topic of our chapter is understanding, assessing, and building children's early number skills. So first, I'd like to just go over some of the learning objectives. In the area of understanding, one of the things we want to cover are the foundations for early number skill development. And it's really important as educators that you feel confident in knowing how children learn math. Second, once we understand what those skills are, is to be able to use that knowledge to assess your students' skill level and track their number skill progress. And why do we want to do that? Well, we want to do that so that we can plan effective instruction. And by doing that, we can help build strong math skills for our students through planned, targeted activities. Now, starting off with understanding, how do children learn? Well, children come to kindergarten with some informal number knowledge. So for example, they know how to count and often count using their fingers. They know some number words. They can subbatize, that is quickly recognize quantities of 3 or less. And they can compare sets of items to say which has more. As they are in kindergarten, they start developing some transitional skills, such as counting and mapping. And by counting is more than just reciting the count sequence. Counting is being able to recognize how many items in a set when you count them. And that's really what counting is all about, being able to enumerate sets of items. So kids start to develop this understanding and this ability to enumerate sets of items as they begin to count consistently and recognize how the count sequence works. Once they have that, they start to connect number words with quantities and with the numbers that they represent, and that is called mapping. So these are kind of our transitional skills that kids are working on in kindergarten to help them develop their formal number knowledge. And by this, we mean the knowledge that involves symbols. And part of that knowledge is recognizing how numbers are related. So for example, numbers can be related in magnitude or size. So here we have 5 is greater than 4, for example. And this is sort of your basic number relation. Building on that, there's the understanding that numbers can be ordered. So 5 comes after 3 and 4, but it precedes 6 and 7. And even more complex is understanding how numbers can be broken down or decomposed. So 5 can be broken down into 2 plus 3. So it's those arithmetic number relations that they're learning. And this number symbol knowledge that children are gaining is really central to their math learning in grade 1. So this is kind of really important to know that these are the key skills that we're looking at that are foundations for later math. So now that we know what those skills are, let's talk a little bit about assessing. So we can assess the counting and the mapping skills, which are sort of those transitional ones, and also the more formal number relations. And in this chapter, we've given some ideas of ways that you can do some of the assessments. So we've provided some instructions, and I'm just going to put up a few examples of the kinds of assessments you might be doing. So for instance, you might be asking a child to count as high as they can to see if they understand how numbers have to follow a stable order. You might ask them to count a set of counting bears to see if they can tell you how many, if they understand cardinality. You might have them matching quantities to number words or quantities to the numerals, words to numbers, to see how their knowledge is of connecting those different ways we represent numbers. And you can also be testing their understanding of formal number relations. So you may, for instance, have some cards and have children say which numeral represents more, 3 or 5. You could set out some cards and have kids order those cards in increasing order. You can look at students using the cards to help make numbers. So these are just a few examples of what is in the text, but it does give you an idea of some of the things you can do. One of the really important things as you're assessing your children's number skills is to actually track those skills. So again, in this chapter, there's a table to give you some guidelines on how you might want to track a student's information. So here, for example, Greta, in September 12th, I guess, was tested on these things by her teacher. And the teacher knew that Greta could only count as high as 8. The teacher knew how well Greta could enumerate sets of numbers. And the teacher made some observations along here. And why do you want to do this? Well, by tracking how your students are doing, it gives you insights into the kinds of things you might want to do. So now you've got some information, you've gathered some data about your students. Now what you need to do is you need to think about the plan moving forward. And we've tried to make that easy for you in this chapter by including a number skills chart. So the number skills chart has some examples of the skills that you would have been assessing, the skills that are important, the skills how you might have assessed them. And then there are some supporting activities to go with that. Some of the activities are described in the chapters, others, they're just named. And there are, as Sandy was mentioning earlier, there are a list of resources, some really great websites that you can go to find some activities to support these specific skills. But the idea of tracking this to help you plan your instruction really can move you towards doing some effective small group instruction. And so just really to kind of encapsulate what that whole process looks at, like, essentially, you understand what are the skills that are important for children. You're testing children and recording those skills. You're analyzing that data, and you might be doing that yourself in the classroom. You might be working with a team of educators as you do this, some of your partners, your teaching partners. And that's going to help you plan how you can move forward with this. You can be creating small groups. And this is one of the things that I must say, Karen Coleman, who was our educator author in this chapter, really gave some solid advice as to how you can incorporate small group instruction into the classroom. So you're going to plan those groups. As kindergarten educators, you are teachers. You teach, you implement the plan, but you're constantly revising, you're reflecting, revising, monitoring, and adapting. And it's not a one-shot deal. You are then reassessing, recording, looking at that data again, making different groups, planning again, replanning, teaching. So it's a continuum that you're working on in your classroom. And we really tried in this chapter to make that as transparent and as easy to implement as we could. And I quite like this quote. I asked Karen, before this presentation, what is this one piece of advice that you think that we're trying to communicate in this chapter that you think is most important for teachers? So being a classroom teacher can be overwhelming at times. Look for ways to incorporate flexible, small group focused lessons and assessment into your daily routine. Remember to reach out and work with other teachers and older student buddies. So I really hope that as you're using the textbook, either in your classroom or you're a teacher who's reading the textbook, that you get some good insights into how to move forward with this. And just hearkening back to the beginning when I was talking about trying to bridge that educator, research practice relationship, I'd like to just do a shout out to the AIM Collective. Now, AIM is a group of educators and researchers who have come together to essentially try and do that, to try and bridge this divide between research and practice. If you go to the website, and I should say they're Canadian educators and researchers, and actually everyone in this little chat room here are all part of that. But if you go to this aimcollective.ca website, you can read newsletters about the kind of work we're doing. You can listen to different podcasts about early math learning. So a really valuable place to go for some inspirations, I think. And then as I promised earlier, here are just a few of the websites where there are some really great research-informed activities that you can just pull out of there to use with your early learning classrooms. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather. It's always so great to work with you on anything AIM related. Heather and I actually presenting at OAME this week in Kingston. So looking forward to that presentation as well. And so Heather's work at Carleton University is part of the Math Cognition Lab, which again, is just great in supporting our understanding of early math development. And Heather also gets to work on an early numeracy screener, which some of you may be interested in learning more about, because there is definitely a need in the field for that. Okay, so thank you so much, Heather. And now I'm going to hand things over to Hannah Wickstrom, who is an expert in play and math, which is, I mean, the best of both worlds, really, Hannah, right? Like early learning and math. I don't think it gets much better than that. So thank you so much, Hannah, for contributing and presenting your chapter to us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sandy. Play and math is always fun. I'm happy to chat about it. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. My name is Hannah Wickstrom, and the work I'm going to share with you today comes from the University of Toronto, though I now work at Lakehead University, where I get to teach teachers. I'm also a former classroom teacher myself, with most of my experience being in early years, and particularly kindergarten education. I had the absolute privilege of writing this chapter alongside two wonderful colleagues, including Dr. Angela Pyle, who's an associate professor at the University of Toronto, and Dr. Christopher DeLuca, an associate professor at Queen's University. Angela is a leading expert in play-based learning, while Chris is a leading expert in classroom assessment. Together, we really try to focus on translating theory into practice throughout this chapter to outline practical steps and resources for educators to support early math learning in the classroom. We've divided our chapter into three general sections. First, we chat a little bit about play, then assessment, and then we talk about how to actually integrate assessment within context of play in order to support children's early math learning. Within each of these sections, we first provide a concise summary of the relevant research literature, and then we explain how the relevant research can be applied through different examples to classroom practice. I want to spend just a little bit of time now talking through some of the key ideas or the overarching ideas discussed throughout this chapter. Let's actually begin by chatting a bit about play and kind of unpacking what play is and what that can look like in early years classrooms. This idea that young children learn through play has been a part of early years education for a really, really long time. It is by no means a new idea, but what is new is the purpose of play in these classroom spaces. Traditionally, play has been viewed as a means of supporting young children's developmental learning, including things like their self-regulation or their social-emotional development. It's largely being viewed as child-directed free play, and adults had no business really getting involved in play. We would often say that adults would ruin play or even hijack play if they were to become involved. Contemporary perspectives, on the other hand, endorse play as a means of supporting developmental and academic learning, including things like literacy and math development. These contemporary perspectives also strongly endorse for adults' active and intentional involvement in contexts of play to support, guide, and extend learning towards targeted goals, including early math skills. This contemporary view has largely described play as a continuum that ranges in level of child and adult control or direction over the play. And while this beautiful continuum here outlines 5 different types of play, it's largely condensed down into just 3 overarching types, including free play, guided play, and teacher-directed play. Let's take a closer look now at each of these 3 different types of play. Beginning with free play here on the left-hand side of the continuum, this aligns with more of that traditional perspective I was talking about. Free play is play that is entirely directed by the child. The adult is not really involved. It's often pretend or socio-dramatic play. In the classroom, this might look like a child playing in the drama center or building with big blocks, where they might be supporting their spatial awareness as they build and manipulate blocks in space. free play can be a very appropriate context for young children to practice and internalize previously learned skills. It would be inappropriate, however, to assume that children are going to acquire new math skills in the context of free play. That is when they need an educator to become involved to introduce and support new learning. To do that, let's take a look at teacher-directed play on the other side of the continuum here. Just as the name suggests, teacher-directed play is play that is directed by the educator. It is highly structured and playful. It has a particular end goal with really discrete steps that need to be followed in order to achieve that goal, all of which was determined by the educator. Think of board games, card games, dice games. For example, in this classroom, this educator had created their own board game where students had to pull a button out of a basket and then find a corresponding shape on their card. In the middle of the continuum here is what's collectively referred to as guided play. And this is play that is to some degree mutually directed by both child and educator. Guided play can feel a little bit tricky sometimes to pin down in practice because sometimes it might be a little bit more child-directed, while other times it might be a little bit more adult-directed. But the key thing here is that both parties, child and adult, have some say regarding the input and outcome of play. For example, in this classroom, the students had turned their drama center into a grocery store. The educator was observing children in free play, and they noticed an opportunity to insert some math learning and extend the play towards math objectives. Specifically, they offered the children this grocery flyer and led a conversation about number and value by talking about the different prices for different food items. The research is quite clear that young children learn and retain the most novel math knowledge when they learn through guided play approaches. Often, guided play is considered to be the sweet spot for early math learning, as it honors children's choice and agency in learning while still allowing for adults' intentional and active participation to guide, support, and extend the play towards targeted objectives, including early math skills. So now we've talked a little bit about what play can look like, unpack that concept a bit. How are educators now supposed to go about assessing math learning within these contexts of play? Again, the research is quite clear and outlines 3 general approaches to assessment that can align with play-based pedagogies. These are referred to as observational, embedded, and withdrawal assessment. In observational assessment, the educator kind of stands on the periphery of play. They are observing the children as they are engaged in play and recording assessment data about their students. This could look like anecdotal note-taking. It could be listening for child quotes, capturing photos or videos. As you might be anticipating, observational assessment aligns quite closely or occurs commonly alongside free play, as the educator acts as more of an unobtrusive observer. With embedded assessment, educators are actually embedding or integrating in their assessment practices as they are playing and learning alongside their students. Again, this can take the form of writing notes, leading discussions and questioning, noticing and naming the learning. Often, embedded assessment aligns with guided play or teacher-directed play approaches. In this example here with the grocery store, the educator was collecting assessment data about the students' number knowledge as they were leading conversations about the different cost of items in their grocery store. Lastly, with withdrawal assessment, the student is actually removed from a context of play and they join the educator in a separate context, often at a different table, maybe in the hallway, or if you're lucky enough to have perhaps a quieter area in your classroom with fewer distractions, the educator will often call the child over to that table to complete a one-on-one assessment with them. This typically takes the form of more standardized assessments looking at different particular skills. For example, looking at a number knowledge task. With withdrawal assessment, it also typically happens alongside free play as the entire class is engaged in free play and the educator withdraws or removes a child from play to assess them in a separate context. Our chapter then kind of concludes through a series of discussion questions to help you consolidate and apply the key learning throughout this chapter. We identify and define key terms, and we point you to several other practical resources, including different websites, assessment tools, key early math concepts, as a way of helping you learn more about both play and assessment. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, we really invite you to adapt the key ideas we talk about in this book, in this chapter, to align with the unique needs of your students and your classroom spaces. So with that, I'd like to thank you for listening to me, and I hope you enjoy our chapter. Pass it back to you, Sandy.
Thank you, Hannah. We always appreciate the great way that you share information and practical ideas for incorporating these types of play into classrooms. And we're so grateful to have you. Also, you'll be returning to the Canadian Early Mathematics Education Conference this summer in Kingston. Yes, Hannah's a repeat guest because educators love hearing about how to incorporate play and math into their classrooms. So thank you so much, Hannah. And now I am going to turn things over to Lynda Colgan. And Lynda knows so much about so many different things. And so she will be talking about the section 3, which is technology and coding, and looking at coding in the early years. I think you're on mute, Lynda.
My apologies. You would think I've done this so many times that that would be automatic. Anyway, here we go. I'm representing in one way or other the third section of the book, Developing Early Mathematical Thinking with Technology and Coding. There are 4 chapters in this section, and they each take a very different approach to how we use technology and what we use technology for. So we have the Touch Points or the Touch Counts program by Natalie Sinclair. We have the team from the Engineering Connections group at Queen's. We have Shonda Wood from Fredericton, from New Brunswick, talking about her experiences in teaching coding and STEM education. And then finally, I'm speaking about the last chapter, and that's chapter 12. So here we are. Chapter 12, Coding, What, Where, Why, When, and How It Matters in Early Mathematics. And you will see that there were actually 4 authors for this particular chapter, including Sandy and 2 amazing educators from the Kawartha Pine, the Pine Ridge School District, Melanie Martin and Ed Schroeder. And we owe much of this chapter to them. Okay, one of the things that this book does, I think so well, is that instead of just presenting information to you as a reader, it tries to be interactive, and it encourages you to stop and think, to ponder, to reflect, and to react to various prompts. So one of the ways we started our chapter was this. Before you read any further, when was the first time you heard the word coding? Where were you and what was the context? How would you define coding based on what you know now? And how do you feel about teaching coding in early years? And in our discussions with a lot of teachers, the word coding carried a lot of weight because it was tied to phrases that were not familiar, like computational thinking. It was associated with computer programming. It was also associated with higher grades. So there were lots of anxieties built around coding. And one of the things this chapter tries to do is have us step back and say, when coding first hit the scene, and it hit the scene, believe it or not, back in 2014, everybody raced to power up. They were busily getting the most cutting edge technologies and software and worrying about getting kids working with robots and this and that, learning how to code online. But what was forgotten is that there was an important step that was missing. And many coding initiatives actually failed because people did not take the time to look at all of the learning that does not require a computer at all. So what we call in our little group, the roots of coding, is all of the pre-coding knowledge that is required before you even begin to think about using any kind of technology. And that pre-coding knowledge is something that has already been included in our curriculum for some time. It's spatial sense. It is about location. It is about position. It is about direction. It is about point of view. It is about labeling space and about pathways and storylines. What we found was that there was a dearth of resources that actually respected the complexity of these particular concepts. And so the roots of coding actually became a series that we developed with Ed and Melanie that is available on that Early Canada Math website that I spoke of before. And what we try to do is actually unpack all of those seemingly simple concepts. I'd like to, of course, begin at the beginning, and that was our examination of the curriculum. So what we did was we said, okay, where does all of this position stuff happen? So Ed did a beautiful synthesis of all of the spatial concepts. So here is our simple thing, describing position. Here it is in the grade 1 curriculum from 2020. Words and phrases such as above, below, to the left, to the right, behind, and in front of. The kindergarten curriculum uses above, below, in, out, again, absolutely no different from grade 1. Then we went to the preschool curriculum. This is for preschool and kindergarten. And guess what we found? Before, after, between, back, front, next, last. And then in the brand new curriculum, guess what we found again? All of the same positional language. So basically, what we found was that there was no growth in terms of the complexity of what children were doing, and there were no examples to show the nuances of these words. So we went to the library. We did a lot of research. We tried to learn as much as we could about the fact that children are competent, curious, and capable of doing much more in their classrooms than the curriculum was asking them to do. In fact, it was just asking them to do the same thing for 5 years. That took us to the Millbrook South Cavan Public School and the wonderful teachers, Ed and Melanie, and the children at that school who taught us so much. One of the first things we learned is that there's a huge difference between vocabulary and math. We know that we read books to our children all the time, and we focus on teaching them vocabulary. But one of the things we found was that basically there were all of these cute activities that said, okay, here's a picture. What do you notice? There are apples on the tree. There are apples in the basket. The blue bird is on top of the beige bird, which is on top of the red bird. But what we found out was that these were misleadingly simplistic. On the surface, expectations like this don't capture the depth of these math concepts. The word position actually has multiple meanings. Now, our role is critical in shaping spatial knowledge. We know that math at home tends to be about number. Parents play games, number games with their children all the time. When children come to school, one of the things that we are expected to do is to move children forward. And as we saw from the curriculum, that wasn't happening in the small way that those words were presented. So basically, one of the things that we wanted to emphasize was the fact that geometry and spatial sense is not emphasized to the same extent as the other strands. And yet we know that children's spatial sense and their abilities here predict their overall math achievement. It's one of the areas that has been underemphasized for a long time. So what Ginsberg and Openzato encourage us to do is to move children from what beyond what Heather talked about is that informal, intuitive knowledge of seeing and move it to thinking, to change from simple perceptions about things to mathematized thoughts. So here are a couple of examples of how children's kindergarten classrooms are organized. There are a multitude of configurations about how children can sit in classrooms. One of the things that we found right away is that we had to be very conscious of seating. So I'm going to give you this example. Each student in the class at Millbrook was given a small clear bag containing 10 connecting cubes. 1 white, blue, red, and green, 2 yellow, black, and orange. In this small group activity, so you can imagine a cluster of children around a pod of desks, children were challenged to listen very carefully as we gave them specific block placement instructions. That included the color and the position of the interlocking cube. And the goal was for all the children in the classroom to create identical block robots. And I know you're laughing right now, because basically the children needed to listen to the instructions, visualize them, and then place the blocks in the correct position. Well, basically, all of our instructions had no meaning when children did exactly what children are going to do. They didn't make their robots flat on their desk. They were watching the students across from them who were doing the opposite movement to what they were doing. And of course, what they did was hold their creation up in the air. So forwards, backwards, besides, all of those things fell away and had no meaning at all. So we learned very quickly that we had to be very specific, not only in the activities, but in how we configured the children. Now, here's another thing that shocked us in a number of ways. In this photograph of a classroom, you'll see that the computer is on the far left-hand side of the classroom. In this photo, the computer is on the far right of the classroom. One of the things that surprised us was that children were surprised by the fact that the classroom looked very different when you looked at it from the front and the back. And what's more, they had great cognitive dissonance when they encountered a picture like this. For those of you, this is Shel Silverstein's wonderful, wonderful poem, Everything on It, where he orders a hot dog. Ginsberg tells us that children have very difficult time imagining, for example, that the hat can be simultaneously below the umbrella and above the flower pot. How can something be in two positions at once? We don't, in all of the curriculum documents, we never heard about complex positional language or opposite positional language. And so we've tried to work this into our lessons and into the chapter. What else did we learn? We tried always to encourage people to use children's literature, which is wonderful and rich and fabulous. And many of you will know this wonderful story called Hey Little Ant, which has a multiplicity of messages. One of the things that we found was that if we were going to read a book like Hey Little Ant to the classroom, we had to focus the children's attention to the math that was in that book. So we had to design prompts and stick to those prompts that would allow the children to picture, manipulate, and orient shapes mentally. Spatial sense is about that mental orientation, understanding, and imagining. This is part of what Hannah called intentional instruction. In order to get the children to imagine in their own mind's eye the positions of the objects and their shapes and their relationships to each other, we had to be very specific. So, for example, on page 3 of Hey Little Ant, have you ever stood beside a very tall statue? How is that like this page? How is it different? 6 ants are carrying a small chip. What can you think of that would take you and 5 friends to carry? So we always worked to bring it back to the child's perspective, because again, the child's perspective is what makes things like teaching right and left so complicated if they're not standing in the same orientation as the teacher. We found a lot of disconnects. One of the biggest disconnects that we found was the smartboard, the whiteboard, because again, when you project something on a whiteboard, up is up and down is down, and that is correct. When you have it on chart paper, up is up and down is down. That's correct. When you move to a floor, up is not the same up as it was on the chartboard or the smartboard. Here now, we're not talking about moving up, because that would mean you were flying, or moving down, because that would mean you were under the grid. You're moving forwards and backwards. This began again, moving in a very specific way from toys to the kinesthetic approach of actually moving our own bodies, and then to moving to a grid on a smaller surface, such as a table. There were more disconnects. Here's one that I'm sure you have encountered. The myriad ways that tables and graphs and maps are labeled. For us, this may seem trivial. For the child, this is a disconnect. Why are the numbers sometimes on the bottom? Why are they sometimes on the side? What we began to do was, again, find that the disconnects continued to grow. When we did things like look at what kinds of resources were available and the kinds of arrows. Arrows seem so simple. Right, left, up, down. Uh-oh. Then when we start looking at other resources, some of the arrows turn in an arc, some of them turn in a right angle, some of them just include an arrow. The different configurations were incredibly difficult for children. And so consistency in helping children to understand how to move was important. And that led us to using flat Stanley-like shapes. Basically, the child put themselves on a popsicle stick and they would learn to move forward, move backwards, turn right, or turn left. And it's important to have both sides so that they know what is going on. We always observed from an asset stance. One of the things that we found, of course, is that everyday language and math language are mixed up all the time. So we talk about things being right, and then we talk to things being to the right. We talk of things being underneath and above, upper, underneath, wherever, and they're not always consistent. So here was a situation in which the child was asked to draw a witch's hat to the right of the heart, and you can read those instructions. So this student followed the instructions correctly. This student drew a blue object to the right of the heart, but not in the correct square. And so basically, they need to have a little bit of remediation in terms of what does directly beside mean. And finally, this child did not follow the directions accurately. The successes were the prescribed colors were used, the blue hat is to the right. This child understands above and below, but again, left and right and upper left and upper right were problematic. So what we found is that we had to revisit concepts like left and right over and over and over again. Now, I'm going to mention this. Whoops, I lost my picture, I'm sorry. In one of our examples, Ed Schroeder, who is the teacher, gets down on a boogie board to demonstrate to become a snake, that a snake on a grid can move forward, they can turn right, they can turn left, but they can't go up and they can't go down. Now, we found that the children laughed and laughed when they saw their teacher down on the boogie board. And we felt that this is really important because children are experiencing learning as safe and fun. We're setting a positive emotional culture in the classroom. And we know that research suggests that learning is 50% socio-emotional and 50% cognitive. And so as educators, when we're given the opportunity to do a lot like coding that can be fun, we have to develop not only the focus on the content, but developing some positive dispositions to that math as well. In closing, one of the things that we found was that these are describing position, location, and instructions is very, very complicated, but those are foundational skills. They're multi-layered, and we have to keep looking at them through the eyes of the child. We can't provide random activities about these because they are incremental and they do develop over time. So what we encourage in the chapter is for classroom coding activities to be well designed, to grow in complexity by small steps, and include multiple opportunities for children to build on and extend their understanding through prompting and questioning and as many multiple occasions as possible. In closing, I would like to quote Liping Ma, who has been very, very influential in my own career. It's one thing to study the students that you're teaching. It's another thing to study the knowledge that you're teaching. If you can interweave the two things together nicely, you will succeed. Believe me, it seems simple when I talk about it, but when you really do it, it's very complicated, subtle, and it takes a lot of time. It is assumed to be very easy to be an elementary school teacher, but it is very, very difficult to be a good elementary school teacher. I'd like to thank you, and I sincerely hope that our chapter helps to make some of these things transparent for you.
Thank you, Lynda. You always do such a wonderful job of highlighting the big ideas in mathematics and also of promoting a positive attitude towards math. So we really appreciate that. So the final presentation will be by Sherry Lynn Skwarczak, who has developed an amazing resource called Toy Box, and Sherry is from University of Winnipeg. She'll be highlighting the final section, which is section 4 about families and communities in early mathematics learning.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay? Yes.
Perfect. And can you see this okay? Oh, just a minute. Okay, can you see
I
the
think you
photo?
just need to click on slideshow.
Yeah.
There it is. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, perfect. So thanks, first of all, for everybody who is attending today to hear about our book. It is absolutely wonderful. And thanks also for the opportunity to share today. My name is Sherry Lynn Skorchuk, and I'm from the University of Winnipeg. And I was honored to be asked to do a chapter in this section 4, which is entitled Engaging Families and Communities in Early Mathematics Learning. And I just wanted to mention that I was excited to use the book with a group of undergraduate students last term, and they all seemed to really like the book. And they heard a lot about what kind of math is going on in Canada, which was really, really nice to see a Canadian book. So in these in this section, there are actually 4 chapters. And you'll notice that a lot of these people, you may recognize their names from other initiatives that they've been working on. So we have Erin Maloney and colleagues who did a chapter on math involvement and well-being. And Erin Maloney is known for her work in math anxiety. We have Sandy Youmans and Lynda Colgan and their colleagues building on parent engagement and reporting on a program that they worked with in schools to encourage parents to be involved in. We have Joanne Lee, who developed a program on little counters in Kitchener-Waterloo libraries for very young children. And finally, I was very honored to have authorship from 36 other people, including Dr. Heather Douglas, on a project describing Toybox. And so what you'll see in these chapters are applications of ways that math has been used and moved into community so that others can enjoy knowledge and how to provide math opportunities for young children. I also would like to mention that our chapter was created on Treaty 1 territory and the homeland of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe Cree, Dene, Dakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And we are also very proud to have some of those members of those Indigenous groups as authors on our project. So instead of just describing the Toybox project, because I'm hoping that actually you're going to see my shirt and our sign, and you're going to want to go and check out our website, toyboxmanitoba.ca. Instead of like talking just about the Toybox, I want to talk about all of these programs because they all, in a unique way, share similar knowledge and experience about how important it is to include parents, caregivers, and family into the math environment. And so all of these programs do this in a unique way. They're encouraging parental engagement. And there is no size that fits all of the children in our country, but the idea is to work with where children are at, use playful practices, and try to make sure that math is part of that learning community. Couple of learning points that I'll mention about all of the chapters. And so I read them all and I was looking for commonalities. These were some of the take homes. First of all, that caregivers are an important learning resource. There are different ways to support mathematics. So some of the chapters talked about number talks, about purposeful play, the idea of mathematizing, like taking a situation and finding the math and pulling it out, having informal experiences, and always, always talking about different ways to count instead of just rote counting from 1 to 10. There's so many other opportunities available. Many of the programs also found that resources needed to be provided. So oftentimes parents might not have felt confident that they knew what they were doing, but with a little nudge and some activities or materials provided and or knowledge support, they could do it. And it made a huge difference for their children. Finally, or almost finally, the projects all talked about how to engage with children and how to include math content. And all of the chapters in some way addressed inclusion, diversity, and indigenization by suggesting that there is no one size fits all, and you have to work at the developmental level of each child. And the children that you know, and of course with caregivers being their the child's first teacher, they know their children very well. So it's a good place to start. And so basically that was the sum of the last section. I'll click to exit, stop sharing. And so the last thing that I just want to mention is that we want to make sure that we're including families, we're including community as we are putting together information about math knowledge for young children. So thank you again for the opportunity, and go buy the book.
Thank you so much, Sherry, for your amazing contribution and your wonderful summary of all the commonalities that we have in terms of trying to engage parents and families and caregivers and communities in early math learning. It is really important. Early literacy does a super great job at involving families in literacy, and now we need to start that happening in mathematics. So thank you so much. And Leanna, I will hand it over to you to wrap things up.
Yeah, I know we're running a bit over time right now, so we'll go through this a little bit quickly. Just want to be conscious of everyone's time. So as I mentioned in the beginning, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions for any of the presenters, please feel free to type them in now. We'll pick one or two quick ones to answer. And while everyone's doing that, I'm going to share my screen again. One moment. There we go. And just remind you of the discount code that is available. So the code is Beyond123 Launch. That is for 20% off your purchase on the Canadian Scholars website up until May 31st, 2024. And that also gives you free shipping within Canada. So give me 1 second here. I'm going to stop sharing. And if there are any questions, we'll just give it 1 more minute.
Leanna, there was a question before which I answered. I probably shouldn't have, but
Okay.
someone wrote in to ask if this webinar was going to be available afterwards. And I said, yes, it was. It was being recorded and people could use it in their professional development sessions in their own schools.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, the recording will be provided afterwards, and it'll be sent out through email as well to anyone who wasn't able to attend live today. Yeah. I think there was also a question as well about the PowerPoint slides and the test bank, if they were included with the book as well. Just so everyone's aware, if you are an instructor that is adopting Beyond 123 for your course or courses, you are able to have access to those supplementary materials. If you are interested in considering Beyond 123 for adoption and you want to review a copy, Canadian Scholars is happy to provide a complimentary review copy in either print or digital format. And you can do that through our website. We have a contact us page with a form there, and you'll be connected with your publisher's representative for your institution.
Well, we have a couple of nice comments in the question and answer, not really questions, but we love lovely comments. So thank you so much, Tracy Anthony. And we are looking forward to hosting you at the Canadian Early Mathematics Education Conference and to hearing about your wonderful intervention, mathematics. And thank you, Ron Benson, as well, for your kind comments and for all the mentorship that you provided to my mentor, Lynda Colgan. So passing it on forward. Thank you so much.
Another nice comment from a PhD student. Good. Well, Leanna, thank you for the opportunity for us to do this. And we hope I was going to say I hope. I know we did the book proud today.
Yeah.
We did the book proud. And we look forward to hearing lots of comments as time goes by that people have read it and what they've learned from it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely. Yep. I just want to say thank you to everyone who attended today, as well as our editors and lovely panels. They've been working very hard behind the scenes to bring you this webinar today. So yeah, just want to say thank you so much again. And I think we'll wrap things up then if there aren't any other questions. So hope everyone has a great afternoon and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.